The frosted window of the mountain lodge framed her like a portrait of desperation. Cassandra Chen stood in the darkness of the entryway, pulling on borrowed boots 2 sizes too large, her breath forming small clouds in the unheated hallway. Luca Conti watched from the shadows of the great room, his silhouette motionless against the dying fire, a man carved from stone and winter. 3 weeks. For 3 weeks he had observed her slip away at exactly 2:17 in the morning, carrying canvas bags stuffed with documents she never brought back, speaking in whispered fragments into a phone pressed so close to her ear it seemed she was trying to hide the words inside her skull. His lieutenant Marco stood 6 feet behind him, one hand resting on the grip of the weapon at his hip. "She is going out again, boss." The same time. The same direction. Luca did not answer. His dark eyes, storm gray in certain light, tracked every movement of the woman beyond the glass. She was checking on Oliver. The boy slept upstairs in a room that cost more in 1 night than Cassandra earned in 2 months. Luca watched her move up the stairs, silent as a ghost. She would verify he was breathing. She would pull the wool blanket up to his small chin. She would stand there for exactly 47 seconds, he had counted, on many nights, with her hand pressed to her heart, as if trying to hold something fragile inside her ribs. Then she would leave him. This was what puzzled Luca Conti, the man who had spent 23 years reading human behavior the way other men read newspapers. A woman who would betray him, and his instinct screamed that betrayal was what was happening here, did not check on the child with that particular tenderness. A woman who was working with federal agents, feeding them details about his operation, did not move through a house like she was afraid of waking the dead. But in his world, hesitation was a luxury that got people killed. Enzo appeared from the kitchen, his massive frame filling the doorway. "The SUVs are ready. 5 men stationed at the North Ridge. We can move whenever you give the signal. And if she leads you to the FBI?" Marco's voice carried the weight of what came next. Luca's jaw tightened. His brother had asked questions too, once. His brother had thought loyalty meant something. His brother had made a choice, and that choice had cost him everything. Luca had been forced to execute the only family he had left, forced to watch the light Levi's that shared his bloodline, because in this life, betrayal was a virus that spread. One person compromised, and the entire operation collapsed. One whisper to the wrong people, and everyone beneath his protection would fall. Cassandra descended the stairs now, and Luca straightened slightly, an almost imperceptible shift in his posture. She wore a grey wool coat 3 years out of fashion, held together at the front with a safety pin because the original buttons had vanished somewhere between the Greyhound station and the rooming house fire. The gold locket hung at her throat, visible even in the dim hallway light, a small object that she touched every time she thought no one was watching. Her mother's locket. He had learned these details not through interrogation but through the simple act of paying attention to someone the rest of the world had decided was invisible. She pulled a knit cap over her hair, checked the window one final time for any sign of movement, and slipped through the side door into the blizzard. The wind outside was a living thing, howling down from the peaks with the voice of something wounded and furious. The snow fell sideways, erasing distance, swallowing sound. She would be invisible out there for perhaps 90 seconds before Luca's men reported her position. "Now?" Marco asked. Luca's hand rose slightly, a gesture that meant wait. "Tonight I follow her myself." Both lieutenants straightened at this. In 15 years of running a criminal empire that stretched from the docks of Staten Island to the casinos of Atlantic City, neither Marco nor Enzo had ever seen Luca Conti leave the lodge during a blizzard. Neither had ever seen him personally conduct surveillance on anyone. He had people for this. He had systems. He had protocols designed so that his time was spent making decisions, not gathering intelligence. But something about the way Cassandra's hand had trembled as she adjusted her coat made him uncertain. And uncertainty, in a man like Luca Conti, was unacceptable. "If she is meeting an agent in the woods," Luca said, his voice steady and low, like the rumble of distant thunder, "I will know within the hour. If she is doing what I suspect she is doing, we will find out the reason. And if she has sold my operation for witness protection and a new identity, then she will learn what happens to people who make bargains with the government. He moved toward the door, reaching for his coat. It was cashmere, black, worth more than Cassandra had earned in her entire life. The weight of it settled across his shoulders like armor. "Do not follow," he instructed. "No men, no vehicles. If she sees them, she will bolt. And a frightened woman in a blizzard is a liability neither of us can afford." Marco exchanged a look with Enzo. The same look they had exchanged when Luca had brought her here 3 weeks ago, soaking wet, burning with fever, carrying a boy whose name she whispered in her sleep. The same look they had exchanged when Luca had ordered the best physician in the region brought to the lodge, had positioned a guard outside her door, had ensured she was given food that did not come from the servant's kitchen. In 15 years of loyalty, they had learned to recognize the subtle shifts in their boss, the way his attention worked differently now. The way he noticed her. The way he had started to care. "She could destroy everything," Marco said quietly. Luca pulled on leather gloves, each finger sliding in with a soft whisper. "Then we will find out tonight if she is as dangerous as I fear, or if I am the fool for letting her get close enough to be." The door opened, and the blizzard consumed him whole. Behind him, the lodge fell into silence. The fire in the great room crackled softly, a sound like bones breaking in the dark. Oliver slept upstairs, unaware that the woman who had been holding him while he cried was being followed into a storm by a man whose last act of mercy had been executed with a bullet to the back of the skull. The snow fell. The wind howled. And somewhere in the wilderness beyond the lodge, Cassandra Chen was walking toward a choice that would destroy or transform everything, and Luca Conti was moving through the darkness to discover which one it would be. But what neither of them knew was how the night would actually unfold. How the truth would arrive not as a confession but as a prayer. How Luca Conti would stand in the middle of a blizzard and understand, with terrible clarity, that he had almost executed the one person in his entire empire who had never lied to him. Before we continue with what happened next, drop a like if this story has you completely gripped. Share it with someone who needs to feel something real. Subscribe so you don't miss a single moment of what's coming. The twist ahead will shatter everything you think you know about these two people. Now, let us go back to the beginning. Let us return to that November rain in New York City, where a woman with $2 to her name was about to make a choice that would change everything. Where a child was sleeping, unaware his mother was about to walk into the darkest night of her life. Where Douglas Hale was already counting his money, and Sophie Langford was already smiling the smile of someone who owned the world. This is where it started. This is where Cassandra Chen was still invisible. The November rain fell on Manhattan like a curse that could not be erased. Cold. Relentless. The kind of rain that soaked through worn fabric and found skin underneath, turning warmth into a memory. Cassandra Chen stood in the kitchen of the Langford penthouse on the 42nd floor, her hands moving through the motions of clearing champagne flutes while the dinner party continued in the great room behind her. 18 hours. That was how long she had been awake. 18 hours of folding children's clothes, preparing meals no one thanked her for, listening to Sophie Langford's voice cut through the air like a blade wrapped in ice. She was 27 years old but looked decades older. Her dark hair pulled back so tightly it seemed to stretch the skin at her temples. Her eyes were brown, almost black, the color of exhaustion and resolve mixed together. The Langford family's chef's uniform hung loose on her frame, white and starched and impersonal, designed to render her invisible, which is exactly what Sophie wanted. Cassandra had learned long ago that invisibility was safer than being seen. Sophie Langford was 53 but maintained the appearance of someone 10 years younger through procedures Cassandra had overheard discussed casually over lunch. She wore a Valentino gown that cost more than Cassandra earned in 4 months. Her hair was platinum blonde, arranged in waves that had taken 2 hours at a salon to achieve. She was beautiful the way a knife is beautiful, sharp, dangerous, and designed to cut. In the great room, Sophie stood beside her husband Richard, a man who made his fortune in real estate and saw Cassandra even less than his wife did. He simply did not register her presence at all. The help left fingerprints on the crystal again, Sophie said, gesturing toward the champagne flutes on the sideboard. She was speaking to Margaret Chen, who was not related to Cassandra, though Margaret had asked upon hiring her if she had any language barriers. Cassandra had said no. What she meant was yes, but she needed the job too desperately to be honest about it. Margaret laughed, that particular laugh rich people use when discussing inconveniences. Does she even speak English? Margaret asked, not bothering to lower her voice. Cassandra was standing 2 feet away, holding a silver tray with 7 flutes arranged in perfect formation. Sophie turned to look at her, really look at her for perhaps the first time in the 6 months Cassandra had worked in her home. I honestly don't know, Sophie said, as if Cassandra were a particularly baffling appliance. I've never asked. Cassandra's hands trembled. The flutes clinked softly together, a sound like ice cracking. She did not speak. She had learned that speaking drew attention, and attention from Sophie Langford always came with consequences. Instead, she bowed her head slightly and moved back toward the kitchen, disappearing into the kind of silence that made her feel like a ghost, quiet and faithful and invisible. That night, after the last guest had left and the penthouse had fallen into the heavy silence of sleep, Cassandra made her way downstairs. She lived in what had once been a storage closet, converted by Richard's decorator into what she assumed was meant to be ironic, 4 feet by 6 feet, no window, a single mattress on the floor, a shelf for her 3 sets of identical uniforms. She was allowed to use the staff bathroom. Everything else belonged to them. But tonight, she would not stay in the penthouse. Tonight, she had to return to her rooming house on the Lower East Side, to the cramped room she shared with 2 other women and to the single landline phone that connected her to the care facility upstate where her brother Oliver was waiting. Oliver was 7 years old. He had cerebral palsy. His body did not obey him the way bodies obeyed other children. His legs required braces. His words came slowly, shaped by a mouth that sometimes refused to cooperate. But his mind was sharp as crystal, and his eyes were the same dark brown as hers, and he loved her with the kind of love that made everything else bearable. 2 weeks ago, the care facility had called with news that changed everything. There was a new experimental treatment. Surgery and therapy combined, pioneered at a hospital in Boston, only available to a select number of children. The success rate was 78%. It could give Oliver mobility he did not have. It could change his life. The cost was $150,000. Cassandra earned $400 per week. She sent $350 to the facility for his care. Every dollar of the remaining $50 went to food and the rent on the rooming house. She was saving absolutely nothing. She would never save enough in time. She would never see her brother walk without braces, never hear him speak without that strained effort that broke her heart every time. The rain pounded harder as she made her way down the penthouse elevator, through the marble lobby where the doorman barely glanced at her, and onto the street. Her jacket was thin. It had never been meant for November. It had been meant for a California autumn where the temperature never dropped below 60 degrees, in a life she used to have before everything had broken. The subway smelled like rust and old human desperation. She sat on a plastic seat held together with duct tape and thought about Oliver's laugh, the sound it made when she read him stories, how he had learned her name and said it in his careful way, Cassandra. The rooming house on the Lower East Side was a 5-story walk-up painted an indeterminate shade of gray. The walls wept with moisture. The stairwell smelled like boiled cabbage and the distinctive odor of poverty, unwashed bodies, mold, linoleum cleaner that could not quite mask the darkness underneath. Cassandra climbed to the 4th floor, her legs heavy, her mind already calculating the numbers. $3 for Oliver's medication this week. $2 for bread. $8 for her portion of utilities. She had $83 until next Thursday when she would receive her weekly wage, and she had already promised $40 to help Carmen from the 2nd floor pay for her daughter's school supplies. She was on the 3rd landing when she heard his voice. Well. Cassandra Chen. Douglas Hale materialized from the shadows like a figure from a nightmare, a man who seemed to occupy more space than his body should allow. He was 52, with the weathered appearance of someone who drank more than he slept, who made his money from people like Cassandra and enjoyed the power it gave him. His shirt was stained with sweat and something darker. His breath smelled like whiskey distilled into something predatory. "Mr. Hale," Cassandra said quietly. She tried to move past him, but he shifted his weight, blocking the stairwell. "I was just coming to." "Your rent was due Tuesday, sweetheart," Douglas said, his voice the texture of gravel. "That's $800 you owe me now. And it's Friday." Cassandra's stomach turned to stone. "Mr. Hale, I can pay $200 now. By next week, I promise I can pay." He stepped closer. She could see the broken capillaries across his nose, the way his eyes moved across her body like she was merchandise he was pricing. "I'm not interested in money, Cassie," he said. His hand reached out and grabbed her wrist, his fingers digging into the thin skin there. "A woman who looks like you, we can work something out." Cassandra jerked her hand back, and the sudden movement caught him off guard. She pulled free and ran. Up the remaining stairs, into her room, slamming the door and turning the lock, a lock that had never worked properly, a lock that was more symbol than safety. She leaned against the door, breathing hard. Her wrist throbbed where his fingers had dug in. She could hear him in the hallway, breathing heavily, considering whether to pursue her, and then, footsteps moving away, down the stairs. He knew the other boarders would interfere if he pushed further. He knew the power he had did not need to be used tonight. Tomorrow would come. Next Friday would come. He could wait. Cassandra sat on her mattress in the dark and pulled out the eviction notice that had been slipped under her door. The words were printed in a font designed to be official and frightening: 24 hours to vacate the premises or your belongings will be removed. 24 hours. That meant sometime tonight, between 3 and 4 in the morning, she would have to leave this place. She had no money for another room. She had no family willing to take her in. She had nothing except the clothes on her back and the $50 she had managed to scrape together by eating half portions and skipping meals entirely. But she had her mother's gold locket, worn so thin the metal had begun to show through the gold plating. Inside it, a photograph of 2 children, Cassandra and Oliver, before the diagnosis, before everything changed. She held it in her palm and made a decision. She would leave. She would find shelter. She would work 3 jobs if she had to. She would find a way to make $150,000 in 14 days, and if the universe was not constructed that way, she would find another way. She would save her brother. She would be invisible if she had to be invisible forever, but Oliver would walk. At 3:47 in the morning, she packed her few belongings into a canvas bag, took the remaining $50 from her hiding place, and left the rooming house without looking back. The November rain soaked through her jacket immediately. The streets were mostly empty, a few cars passing, their headlights creating halos in the mist. She had no destination. She had no plan. She had simply the absolute knowledge that she could not stay in that room any longer. 3 blocks away, at the corner of Eldridge and Hester, armed men were moving through the darkness in a formation that suggested military training. There were 6 of them. They wore dark clothing that blended into the shadows. They were hunting someone, moving through the rain with the kind of purposeful silence that belonged to people who had done this many times before. They were moving toward an alley where a wounded man had taken shelter, a man who had made a mistake and was about to pay for it. What Cassandra Chen did not know was how close she was walking to her own transformation. How in a matter of moments, her choice to leave her room, her choice to walk these particular streets, would converge with a violence she could not yet imagine. How a single act of mercy would be witnessed by someone whose own world had been hollowed out by betrayal. The rain fell harder. The city lights reflected off the wet pavement in shades of red and gold and blue. And somewhere in the geometry of this November night, 2 lives that should never have intersected were moving toward each other, pulled by a force neither of them yet understood. The rain hammered against the alley walls like bullets against steel, and Cassandra Chen's breath came in shallow gasps as her worn sneakers splashed through the puddles. The November wind cut through her thin jacket, the kind of cold that belonged to people with nowhere warm to go. She was trying to reach the subway station before the last train departed at 4 in the morning, her canvas bag clutched tight against her ribs, when the shouting began. 3 men in dark coats blocked the far end of the alley, their silhouettes sharp against the distant streetlight. Between them, pressed against a rusted dumpster, was a boy, no more than 19, bleeding from his shoulder, his voice cracking as he begged in broken English. "Please, please, I did not mean." One of the men raised a gun. The sound of the hammer cocking echoed off the brick like a death sentence. Cassandra's feet stopped moving. Every nerve in her body screamed at her to turn and run, to pretend she had seen nothing, to let the world take what it wanted from this stranger just as it had taken everything from her. The boy's face twisted in terror, and she saw Oliver's face there instead. 7-year-old Oliver, afraid of the dark, afraid of pain, afraid of failing at the physical therapy that was supposed to save his legs. She stepped forward. Her voice shook like a candle in the wind, barely steady enough to carry across the rain, "Leave him alone." The men's heads turned toward her in unison. For a moment, the only sound was the rain, the wind, and the boy's ragged breathing. Then one of them laughed, a man with an angular face and a gold tooth that caught what little light existed in that terrible place. He stepped toward her, his gun hanging loose at his side like it was part of his hand. "Lady, walk away or you're next." She did not walk away. She stood there in her soaked jacket, shaking, her 2 remaining dollars falling from her pocket into the puddle at her feet. She watched the bill disappear into the dark water and did not move. The man with the gold tooth raised his weapon. The rain sounded like static, like the world was breaking apart around them. Then a voice cut through the darkness. Not loud. Not threatening. Simply a word, "Enough." The men froze. From the shadows at the alley's mouth emerged a man who made the world seem smaller by his presence alone. He was tall, broad-shouldered, wearing a cashmere coat that probably cost more than Cassandra's annual wages. He was in his early 40s, with dark hair touched at the temples with silver, and a scar running along his left jawline like someone had tried to carve away part of his face and failed. His eyes were the color of a winter storm, and they held the weight of someone who had seen too much death. Luca Conti did not raise his voice. He did not move his hands from where they rested at his sides. He simply existed in that space, and the men with the guns holstered their weapons and stepped back as though he had commanded an entire army. Why? His gaze fell on Cassandra like a blade wrapped in ice. "Because nobody else would," she whispered. Something shifted in Luca's expression, a flicker of recognition, as though he had seen something he thought extinct in the world. He turned to the men. "Take the boy to Dr. Rossini. Patch him. Send him home." His eyes returned to Cassandra. "You live around here." She opened her mouth to answer. She never got the words out. In the distance, across 3 blocks of sleeping New York, orange light bloomed against the November sky. Sirens wailed to life, piercing the night like prophecy. Cassandra's body recognized the direction before her mind could process it. The rooming house. The place Oliver slept. The only home her brother had ever known. She ran. The rain soaked her through completely as her legs carried her faster than she knew she could move. Behind her, Luca Conti and his men followed without question, moving through the darkness like ghosts. When she arrived at the intersection where she could see the building clearly, the world became fire. Flames consumed the entire structure, reaching toward the sky like arms trying to claw their way into heaven. Firefighters in heavy gear moved through the chaos while crowds of people in robes and pajamas stood behind yellow tape, watching their homes vanish. The heat was so intense that Cassandra could feel it from half a block away, dry and hungry against her wet skin. She stood in the street, her small frame rigid, her eyes reflecting the orange inferno. In that moment, she did not cry. Her tears had dried up somewhere on a Greyhound bus when she was 17 years old, sitting with an infant in her arms, wondering how she would survive. Instead, she became very still. Very quiet. She reached up and grabbed her mother's gold locket from around her neck. She had woken with the instinct to take it before the fire consumed the room, moving on pure animal survival, and held it tight against her palm. The borrowed jacket on her back. The locket in her hand. Nothing else remained. Douglas Hale stood across the street, watching from the shadows beneath an oak tree. His expression was unreadable, but his eyes moved across her face with an intensity that suggested he was cataloguing something. Filing it away. Using it. What Cassandra could not know was that Luca Conti was also watching her face in the firelight, and something ancient and broken inside him stirred to life for the first time in 3 years. Since his brother had betrayed him. Since the world had shown him that loyalty was a luxury only fools could afford. He was watching her stand in the ashes of everything she owned, clutching a locket unbroken. He was watching absolute desperation with nowhere left to fall, and he recognized it because he carried the same weight in his chest. 2 hours before dawn, Marco approached him at the edge of the crowd. The lieutenant was a thick man in his 50s, with grey threading through his dark beard, his suit somehow pristine despite the chaos. "Boss, the woman, she has nowhere to go." Luca did not hesitate. "Bring her to the lodge. Her and the boy." Marco's eyebrows lifted slightly, but he did not question. "Yes, boss." The drive north took 2 hours. The November sky, which had wept rain all night, began to shed snow as they climbed into the Catskills. By the time the black SUV pulled through the gates of Luca's mountain property, a blizzard was raging, the kind of storm that sealed the world away from everything beyond it. The lodge itself was massive, built from stone and darkwood, with a fireplace that rose 2 stories and windows that rattled against the wind. Cassandra sat in the main room, wrapped in a cashmere blanket that had never touched her skin before, her hands trembling around a mug of tea that Enzo had placed in her fingers without speaking. Enzo was younger than Marco, maybe 35, with kind eyes that didn't match the tattoos running down his neck. He had retrieved Oliver from a neighbor who had been keeping him while Cassandra worked her night shift. Oliver slept on the couch beside her, his small body curled into a C-shape, his left leg twisted slightly beneath him in the way that broke her heart every time she looked at it. The muscles would not obey him. The neural pathways had never formed correctly, the doctors said. But there was money that could help. There was treatment at Columbia Presbyterian. There was hope, if she could somehow conjure $150,000 in 2 weeks. The fire crackled in the massive stone fireplace. The wind screamed outside like something dying. The lodge smelled of cedar and old smoke and the kind of safety that Cassandra had never experienced before. Luca Conti sat across from her, his body relaxed but his attention absolute. Marco and Enzo stood by the doorway, their presence a quiet assurance that nothing dangerous would enter this room. Luca's eyes moved across Cassandra's face with the thoroughness of someone making a decision that would change the shape of his world. "Why did you step in front of those guns?" His voice was deep and solid like an oath. Cassandra's own voice emerged hollow, barely audible above the wind. "I don't know. Someone had to. You could have died." "I'm already dying," she said. "Just slower." The silence that followed was broken only by the sound of the storm and the crackling of the fire. Luca waited. He was a man accustomed to people filling silences with their own guilt and fear. But Cassandra simply sat there, holding the mug, her eyes distant. Finally, Luca spoke again. "Tell me about the boy." And she did. She told him about Oliver, about the cerebral palsy that had stolen the use of his legs before he was even born, about the surgery at Columbia Presbyterian that cost $150,000 and could reshape his life, about the 14-day window before the doctor accepted another patient. She worked 18-hour days as a live-in nanny in Manhattan. She slept in a converted closet. She earned $400 a week. She had saved $23,000 in 3 years. She needed $127,000 more. In 2 weeks. It was impossible. She did not cry as she spoke these numbers, but her hands shook so badly that tea slopped over the sides of the mug. When she finished, Luca asked quietly, "What happened to your parents?" Her hand moved to the locket at her throat. "Car accident when I was 17. Oliver was 1 year old. I've raised him since." Luca stood and walked to the window, his silhouette framed against the white rage of the blizzard. His shoulders were broad enough to fill the frame entirely. When he turned back, his decision was already made. "I'll cover the surgery. All of it. $150,000. Cassandra stared at him. The mug nearly slipped from her fingers. What? Nobody steps between guns for a stranger, Luca said. You did. The boy will have his surgery. Marco and Enzo exchanged a look that neither man had needed to share in 15 years of service. In all that time, they had never seen him offer mercy without condition or calculation. But what Cassandra did not know was the cost of accepting help from a man like Luca Conti. At 9 in the morning, her phone rang. Sophie Langford's voice emerged like venom. You abandoned your post. You're fired. And I'm keeping your last paycheck for damages. The line went dead before Cassandra could respond. That paycheck was $400 she had planned to use for Oliver's medication. An hour later, Douglas Hale called. His voice was oily, practiced, the voice of a man who had perfected the art of casual cruelty. Cassie, I heard about the fire. Terrible shame. But you still owe me $800 in back rent, plus damages to my property. Let's call it $3,000 total. You've got 48 hours to pay, or I'm pressing charges. I lost everything in that fire, Cassandra whispered. Not my problem, sweetheart. Unless you want to work something out. The implication hung in the silence between them like poison. She hung up, shaking. Luca watched from the doorway. Who was that? Nobody. Just old debts. His eyes narrowed, but he did not press. Over the next 3 days, as the blizzard trapped them at the lodge, Luca watched Cassandra move through the rooms with a tenderness that made his chest ache. She read to Oliver by the firelight. She made him laugh. She protected him from the weight of the world with her entire body, positioning herself between her brother and any darkness that might try to reach him. Late one evening, after Oliver had fallen asleep, Luca and Cassandra sat together by the fire. The wind howled outside. The flames cast shifting shadows across both their faces. My brother sold our family to the Yakuza, Luca said quietly. Gave them everything, roots, contacts, connections built over 40 years. I had to choose between mercy and survival. What did you choose? Cassandra asked. His silence was the answer. She did not flinch. Instead, you're not the monster you think you are. You don't know what I've done. I know you saved me when you didn't have to, Cassandra said. I know you're saving my brother. Something shifted between them, like a door opening into a room neither had known existed. Then Cassandra's phone buzzed. An unknown number. A text that made her blood freeze. Ms. Chen, this is Agent Rivera, FBI. We need to talk about your former employer and landlord. Tomorrow, 9 a.m., Route 9 coffee shop. Come alone. Her hands began to shake. The coffee shop smelled like burnt sugar and old milk. At 9:03 a.m., a woman in a grey blazer slid into the booth across from Cassandra. Agent Rivera. She carried a manila folder the color of autumn leaves, and when she opened it, photographs scattered across the laminate table like accusations. Douglas Hale accepting cash payments in a basement office. Sophie Langford signing documents in a glass building that scraped the sky. Wire transfers. Shell companies. Bank accounts in the Cayman Islands. Sophie's signature on every single page, careful and precise, like she was signing a love letter instead of theft. We've been building this case for 2 years, Rivera said. Her voice was flat, professional, the voice of someone who had delivered this speech 100 times before. Money laundering through commercial properties. Housing fraud, charging tenants double rates, pocketing the difference. Racketeering. And extortion. Rivera's eyes moved to Cassandra's face. We know about Douglas Hale's arrangements with his tenants. Cassandra's hands went cold. Why would I help you? Cassandra whispered. The coffee shop around them had become a blur. An old man reading the newspaper 3 tables over. A mother and daughter sharing a croissant. Ordinary people living ordinary lives, unaware that a woman at a corner booth was deciding whether to speak words that could destroy everything. Because Douglas Hale owns 23 properties in this city, Rivera said. And on the lease agreements for 17 of those properties, there are notes. Handwritten notes in his file. Notes about tenants who wouldn't cooperate. Notes describing what he would do to them if they didn't. Rivera closed the folder. You're not the first woman he threatened. And you won't be the last unless we stop him. What about Sophie Langford? She's been stealing from her own charity foundation. $1.4 million over 4 years. Medical research fund that was supposed to help children like your brother. Instead, she used it for art purchases, vacation homes, designer bags. Rivera leaned forward. The money that should have gone to Oliver's surgery went to Sophie's closet. The rage that bloomed in Cassandra's chest was clean and hot, like fire cutting through ice. What do I get? Cassandra asked. Witness protection. New identity. Relocation assistance. And a medical trust fund for Oliver. Untouchable. The surgery happens. The specialists confirm it. You disappear, and you start over somewhere safe. Cassandra thought of Sophie's cold eyes when she'd asked for help. The way Sophie had actually laughed, when Cassandra explained Oliver's diagnosis. He's not even family, Sophie had said, dismissing him like a piece of furniture she'd decided to throw away. I'll testify, Cassandra said. What she didn't understand was the price. Not the price Rivera was offering, but the price she would pay. For the next 3 weeks, Cassandra moved through 2 worlds like a ghost. By day, she was at the lodge with Luca and Oliver. She read stories by the firelight. She taught Oliver card games on a table carved from dark wood. She made pancakes for breakfast and soup for dinner, and Luca watched her move through his home as if she belonged there, which made everything harder. By night, she was someone else. At 2 a.m., she would slip out of the lodge in borrowed clothes. Agent Rivera would pick her up on a dark road 2 miles away, where snow fell like ash and the world was empty. They would drive to safe houses and parking garages. Cassandra would wear a wire underneath her clothes, the microphone taped to her ribs, cold and foreign against her skin. She would call Douglas Hale. She would let him threaten her. She would let him describe what he would do if she didn't find the money. And all of it was recorded. Every threat. Every obscenity. Every moment of his cruelty preserved on tape, waiting to be played in a federal courtroom. I'm visiting Oliver, she told Luca. At a rehabilitation facility upstate. They're running tests. It was true. Just incomplete. The kind of truth that tastes like a lie when you swallow it. Luca said nothing. He never asked questions. But Marco, she noticed, began watching her differently. His eyes followed her when she prepared to leave. His hand rested on the gun at his waist. The men could smell something changing in the air, the way animals smell a storm coming. 3 weeks. 21 days of lies stacked like cards. Then came the night that destroyed everything. It was 3 a.m. The blizzard had returned, wind screaming down the mountainside like something alive and furious. Cassandra was in the kitchen preparing to leave when Luca appeared in the doorway. His silhouette filled the entire frame. His eyes were the color of a winter sky, gray, cold, infinite. Where do you go every night? He asked. The canvas bag in Cassandra's hand suddenly weighed 10,000 pounds. I told you. I visit. Don't. His voice was ice-wrapped in velvet. Don't insult my intelligence, Cassandra. I had Marco follow you last week. You met with a woman. In a government car. A federal vehicle. The room tilted. The wind from the eave sounded like drumming fingers, like a heartbeat slowing down, like the sound of endings. I can explain, Cassandra said. Luca stepped closer. Each step was deliberate, measured, the footfalls of a man accustomed to other people yielding ground. In my world, when someone sneaks around. When they meet with federal agents. When they lie to your face, night after night, there is only one explanation. His hand moved to his waist. She saw his fingers brush the edge of his jacket. And one consequence. She thought of Oliver upstairs, sleeping peacefully. She thought of the surgery that would save his life. She thought of the $30,000 in a trust fund that would never be hers to keep. She thought of death. "I'm working with the FBI," Cassandra said. The words came out like breaking glass. "Not against you. Against Douglas Hale and Sophie Langford. They're money launderers, Luca. They steal from people who have nothing. They destroyed my life." Douglas Hale tried to, her voice cracked. "And the FBI needed a witness. I said yes because they're monsters. Because witness protection means Oliver stays safe. Because for once in my life, I get to be something other than invisible." Silence. The kind of silence that happens after thunder cracks the sky. Luca stepped back. His hand dropped. "You should have told me," he said finally. "Would you have let me?" Cassandra whispered. No answer came. But in the silence between them, the truth crystallized: the FBI raid was happening at dawn. 3 hours away. Everything was about to burn. At 4:33 a.m., the streets of Lower Manhattan were still dark when 12 agents in tactical gear moved through the pre-dawn silence like shadows given purpose. Their footsteps echoed on concrete. Their radios crackled with coded language. Douglas Hale's rental property office occupied the ground floor of a building on the corner of 5th and Park. The battering ram hit the door. Douglas Hale woke to the sound of his world ending. He stumbled down the stairs in boxer shorts and an undershirt, his body still drunk on sleep, his brain still operating in the logic of dreams where he was powerful and untouchable. By the time he reached the ground floor, agents were everywhere. Their weapons were drawn but not yet aimed, a courtesy that would be the last kindness he received. He tried to run. An agent caught him by the arm. Douglas Hale collapsed to his knees, his body folding like origami, his face draining white, his mouth opening and closing like a fish pulled from water. He was shaking. Actually trembling, the way frightened animals tremble in the moment before the trap closes. "I didn't do anything," he begged. "This is a mistake. There's been a mistake." Agent Rivera read his rights while cameras flashed outside. News vans were already arriving, their satellite dishes reaching toward the sky like prayers no one would answer. Douglas Hale was led out in handcuffs at 5:02 a.m., the sun just beginning to crack the horizon, his face captured on 1,000 phones, his name screaming across news channels before his feet touched the pavement. Federal prison. 40 years. The judge would say it was justice. It was not. It was mathematics. 20 blocks away, Sophie Langford was still awake. Her penthouse still glowed with the remnants of last night's party, champagne glasses scattered across marble counters, expensive heels abandoned on imported rugs, the smell of wealth and excess hanging in the air like perfume from the dead. The agents arrived at 5:15 a.m. Sophie answered the door in a silk robe the color of blood. A champagne glass was frozen halfway to her lips. When she saw the badges, when she understood what was happening, her body went rigid. "Do you know who I am?" she said. Her voice had the tone of someone accustomed to having every question answered in her favor. "Yes, ma'am," the lead agent said. "You're under arrest." The champagne glass fell. It shattered on the marble floor in a sound like small bones breaking. Sophie screamed as they cuffed her wrists. Her guests watched, other women like her, draped in designer clothes, their phones already recording, already uploading. By breakfast time, her face was on every news channel. Her charity foundation exposed as a theft machine. Her accounts frozen. Her reputation annihilated. The woman who had stood in her penthouse and called a desperate woman disposable was now disposable herself. The cruelty she had dealt to others came home to roost in real time, broadcast to millions. Federal prison. 40 years. Too quick, too easy. But systematic destruction, the slow erasure of everything she had built, the public humiliation, the fall from every height she had climbed, that was a different kind of mercy. Both villains were gone. Not dead. Far worse, imprisoned and forgotten, stripped of the only thing that had ever mattered to them, their power over others. The snow fell in thick, silent sheets against the lodge windows as Cassandra Chen stood in the doorway of the room that had become her refuge. She had spent 3 weeks here, 3 weeks of washing dishes, folding linens, watching Oliver laugh for the first time since his father died. 3 weeks of Luca Conti watching her with eyes that saw too much. Now the FBI agent sat in the living room downstairs, paperwork spread across mahogany tables, and everything was about to change again. The car ride back to the city took 4 hours. Luca drove. Marco and Enzo followed in a black SUV behind them, their tires cutting through accumulating snow. Neither Luca nor Cassandra spoke. The silence between them was not peaceful. It was the silence of two people who understood that an ending had already begun. At the lodge, Luca stood by the fireplace with his back to her. The flames cast shadows across the stone, shadows that looked like reaching hands. His shoulders were rigid beneath his charcoal sweater, expensive fabric that probably cost more than her entire childhood wardrobe. "You're leaving," he said. Not a question. Cassandra's voice came out smaller than she intended. "The FBI says it's safer. Douglas Hale has associates. People who might retaliate. You were never in danger from me." "I know." She swallowed. "But I lied to you. Every night I went to meet the agents. Every conversation we had, I was lying. You can't forgive that." Luca turned. His expression was controlled, perfectly controlled, but his eyes betrayed the truth. They held the weight of every betrayal he had ever endured. His brother. His partners. A wife whose name he rarely spoke. "In my world, I've been betrayed by everyone I trusted," he said, and his voice was like distant thunder. "I thought you were another one. But I was wrong." Cassandra felt her chest constrict. "I'm sorry." "Don't be. You did what you had to for Oliver. I understand that." He paused. The wind outside howled like something wounded. "I understand it better than anyone ever could." She wanted to say something then, that she saw him, that he was not the monster everyone believed, that these 3 weeks had meant something that could not be unmade. But the words lodged in her throat like stones. Marco and Enzo helped her pack in silence. Marco, whose face had been scarred by a knife fight in 1998, moved quietly through the hallway carrying boxes. As he set down her belongings, he spoke so softly she almost missed it. "He won't say it, but you changed something in him. First time in years I've seen him smile. Real smile. Not the kind he uses on people he's about to destroy." Oliver asked to see Luca before they left. The boy stood in the kitchen doorway, his small frame dwarfed by the space around him. "Will you visit me?" His voice was steady but his hands trembled slightly. "After my surgery." Luca's jaw tightened. Cassandra watched the muscle flex beneath his skin. "Maybe, kid," he said finally. "I'll try." But his eyes told a different story. His eyes said he had already made peace with not trying at all. They left at dawn. The world was white, completely, utterly white, as if the snow had erased everything that came before. Cassandra held Oliver's hand in the back seat while Luca drove them to the train station. She didn't look back when she heard him turn the key in the ignition. She didn't allow herself to look back. But Luca stood at the lodge window and watched until the car disappeared into whiteness. Marco came to stand beside him, saying nothing. There was nothing left to say. 1 year later. Cassandra Chen stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of her own penthouse in Brooklyn, the late evening light turning the Hudson River into molten gold. The space was hers, not borrowed, not temporary, genuinely hers. The walls held photographs of Oliver learning to walk with braces, his physical therapist cheering behind him. The kitchen had a refrigerator filled with his favorite foods. Her non-profit, the Chen Foundation for Pediatric Medical Access, operated from an office 2 blocks away. 17 families had received full surgical funding this year. 73 more were waiting. By every measure, she had won. She had survived. She had built something meaningful. Then why did the apartment feel hollow? The apartment door opened. She didn't turn. The only person who had a key was someone she had given it to almost a year ago, hoping against hope that he would eventually use it. The footsteps behind her were measured, deliberate, the footsteps of a man who had learned long ago to announce his presence by the weight of his movement. Luca Conti stepped onto her balcony. He was quieter than she remembered, and older, the kind of aging that comes from carrying the weight of cities. His hair showed silver at the temples now. But his eyes were unchanged. Storm gray, penetrating, the eyes of a man who had seen the worst humanity had to offer and chosen not to become it. "How did you find me?" she whispered. "I never stopped looking." He stood at a distance, respecting the space between them as if it were a living thing. "I paid someone very expensive to find you the day after you left. And every day after that, I knew where you were. What you were doing. I needed to know you were safe." The wind carried the sound of traffic far below, the distant hum of the city that never slept. Cassandra's breath caught in her throat. "I came to tell you the truth," Luca continued. "The truth I carried through that blizzard, through every night since. The truth I was too afraid to say when you left because I thought it would make it harder for you to go." He stepped closer. "You were never invisible to me, Cassandra. From the moment you stood between those guns, a woman with $2 in her pocket willing to die for a stranger, I saw you. When you cared for Oliver like he was your own blood. When you stood in the ashes of your rooming house and refused to break. When you risked everything to stop monsters." His voice dropped lower. "I saw all of it." Cassandra's eyes filled with tears that spilled down her cheeks like rain. "Luca? My world is dark," he said. "I've done things I can't undo. Things that will follow me into whatever comes after this life. But you carry light like it's something you were born understanding. And I spent a year trying to forget that. Trying to go back to who I was before you stepped between those guns. But I couldn't. Because you showed me that the invisible people, the ones sleeping in closets, working 18-hour days, pouring everything they have into children who need them, they're the ones who change everything. They're the ones who change men like me." She closed the distance between them. The city spread below like a living thing, millions of lights in the darkness, millions of invisible people each carrying their own small light. "I wasn't trying to change you," she said. "I know. That's why it worked." Their hands found each other in the space between them. His fingers were warm, calloused, bearing the weight of all he had survived. Hers trembled slightly, not from fear but from the overwhelming reality of it. He had come. He had crossed the distance. He had chosen her. "I don't know what this looks like," Luca said. "I don't know if someone like me deserves to ask someone like you to." "Stop," she said. "I don't need you to be anything other than what you are." They stood in the silence, the city breathing below them, and for the first time in a year, Cassandra Chen was not invisible. She was seen. She was known. She was home. Inside the penthouse, Oliver called out. "Mom? Is someone here?" Luca's eyes widened slightly at the word. Mom. She had earned it. "Yes, baby," Cassandra called back. "Someone is here. Someone very important." And in that moment, two broken people, one from poverty, one from power, found that sometimes the greatest strength is simply being willing to be seen. If this story moved you, hit that like button now. Share it with someone who needs to remember their worth. Subscribe because tomorrow we have another story that will break your heart and rebuild it piece by piece. Drop a comment. Have you ever felt invisible? What moment made you realize you were seen? We read every single comment. This is why we tell these stories. To remind you that your light matters. Even in the darkness. Especially in the darkness. No matter how hard life gets, remember that after the rain, the sky clears. Thank you for staying with us until the very end. We wish you good health, joyful days, and peace in your heart. We'll see you in the next video.